Okay, so these are our notes on Animalia. So far we've talked about living things and their basic characteristics, and you probably know quite a few of those. They should be becoming part of your learning and being able to look at something and ask these characteristics and see if they're a living thing or not. And we also looked at some classification where we have domains. And in domains we have 3 of those, right? We have archaea, we have bacteria, and we have eukarya. And then we can then take those domains and go into different kingdoms. These just are the same. They don't really change. There isn't a different branch, it's just one. And then eukarya can be plants, it can be animals, it can be fungi, and it can be protista. So this is the next level. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then go to this kingdom, and these are all the 6 right here that I'm kind of doing this with. Those are the 6 kingdoms we've talked about. But we're going to kind of really go and really talk the next 2 base camps about animals. And animals have different phyla, and really they can be understood as inverts or vertebrates. And we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, but if we want to find, what determines whether something's a fungi, a plant, an animal, an archaebacteria, and so on, what determines that? How can we look at something and say, no, that's an animal, that's a plant? What are the defining characteristics? Well, these are the 7 right here. Some people might argue this is too many. I just like to include as many as possible. And some might even say these kind of meld together, some of them. But let me go to the first one though. Eukaryotes. So these have eukaryotic cells. That means they have membrane-bound organelles. And an example of those is a nucleus. It's a big one. Okay, and mitochondria. Just list one more. Mitochondria. There's chloroplast, Golgi, all those kind of things. But those are eukaryotic cells. The organisms that have eukaryotic cell are in this eukarya. So this is kind of, when we say an animal is a eukaryote, we mean it's in this kingdom, not kingdom, but domain, and then we have to come up with some other characteristics that exclude the other organisms in this group right here. Okay, so let's see what they are though. But this one, eukaryotic cells, it excludes these right here, because these are prokaryotic cells. And prokaryotic cells are a lot smaller. They don't have any of these membrane-bound organelles. They are just very different. So if we find some cells, something we thought was living, and we looked at their cells, we could say if they have organelles in them that, well, we know it's possibly an animal, and then we have to check some other characteristics. So if I keep going here, I'm going to erase that stuff. Let me do that one more time. This bottom stuff a little bit. So big. Okay, the next thing is heterotrophic, and that means eats other organisms to obtain energy. So these kind of organisms, an animal is heterotrophic, it can't produce its own energy. Now it can eat other things and break that down to get energy, but it cannot produce its own. This characteristic, heterotrophic, eliminates plants. So if we put a little purple over it. So we got one strike against plants, because they're not heterotrophic. Plants are able to produce their own energy by using the energy from the sun. Animals can't do that. But we still have protista, fungi as well, so they're not eliminated yet. So we kind of keep going. So this characteristic kind of helps eliminate one of the first kingdoms. And then, so we keep going here. The next one is multicellular and tissue. The only exception for an animal that doesn't have a tissue is a sponge, and a sponge really has specialized cells. They're not quite tissue. You could maybe argue they were. They have things called collar cells and ostia, kind of other things that are specialized cells, but they're not quite tissue, but they're an animal as well, though. Multicellular. So this means, more than one cell. And they also, this tissue, and many have organs, as well as organ systems. And this just suggests that they are complex. Just more complex. But the main thing here is multicellular. So we look for what can we eliminate now on this list. We go back to Protista. These guys right here, they are now eliminated. They don't fit that because they are single-celled organisms for the most part. And so then we're down to animals and fungi. And then we also add the next one, capable of movement. Now, not every animal can move its entire life, but this is sometime in its life. I'm going to leave purple on here. Actually, we're not do that because I'm using that color. So this is at some time in its life cycle. So not every single animal can move all the time, but there's points in its life cycle where it can. And that kind of, you think of fungi, they don't have legs, they don't have the ability to move. That kind of eliminates fungi. Okay, so we just can cross them out, right? So now we're down to animals, and really we could say these four characteristics by themselves, if something can't answer any one of these, we know it's most likely an animal. But then there's some other characteristics that they have that we really should consider. And the first one is, number 5, is sexual reproduction through although a small number are capable of asexual, sexual reproduction is the use of a gamete. Okay? And a gamete, an example, would be an egg and a sperm. And these are just cells, right? Single cells, but they're really unique because they have half the DNA. And why that's important, if we look at, humans, then humans have, their DNA is 46 chromosomes. And if you look at an egg, it has 23C and sperm 23C. Then they come together, then they have 46. And you can think of, if each of them had 46 before they came together, after they made a new living thing, a zygote it's called at first, a fertilized egg, it would then have 92 chromosomes, and that's not a human being. They only have 46. So it'd make it really complicated. Okay, so the body, as a result, produces gametes, or a gamete, that has half the amount of DNA, and it kind of works well. But the next one kind of ties into that. Number 6 is diploid. That means 2 sets of DNA, and that's where the 46 comes in. So you have 23 chromosomes on the sperm, 23 on the egg. That gives you your 46. So you have these 23 pairs of chromosomes, and they determine your traits. Now, we're not going to go into genetics here very much, but you get a certain amount of DNA from your mom via the egg, and then a certain amount of DNA from your dad via the sperm, and then that determines your traits. So whatever genes you have from your mom for a certain trait, and whatever genes you have from your dad for a certain trait, that determines in the end what you have for a trait. Okay, and not all organisms are that way. Some organisms have more than 2. Strawberries, I think, are tetraploidy, which is 4 sets. And if you remember, if you were able to do the strawberry extraction of DNA, you saw there's a lot, and that's because they're tetraploidy. There's a lot of different sets. Okay, and then we look at this last one here. This is do not possess rigid cell walls. So animals have cell membranes, but no cell walls. So as a result, the shape is usually circular or round, a round cell. If you look at a plant cell, it's very square-like. If you look at it under a microscope, it's amazing how symmetrical it is. But animal cells, very circular. Oftentimes they can be stretched out, like a squashed circle, but they still have that general shape. They don't have this symmetry with angles and such. And that makes them very different than fungi or plants. And those are the 7 main characteristics. Make sure you kind of review them. Make sure you understand them. I'm sure you have a little quiz on this. So be aware of that. And I'm going to erase this. We'll talk about a few more things, and then we'll be done. So if we keep going, there's a few more things to talk about. And they are the 2 main groups. And we kind of hinted at this at the beginning. But the 2 main groups of animals, and we're still talking about animals. Animalia it's called. We'll put that in. Kingdom Animalia. There's vertebrates, invertebrates. We're vertebrates, backbone, internal skeleton. So you think of, like bears and all these things that have these, large organisms. Okay. And invertebrates, they either have external skeleton, and they call that an endoskeleton, or no skeleton at all, really. I mean, they may have some things in their body form that helps make them rigid, but in the end, they really don't have a specific skeleton. And we'll look at those when we come back. But this is a huge group, 97%. A big part of this is insects. There's just so many insects in the world and so diverse that it really pumps their numbers up. Okay, so always remember that 2 groups, vertebrates, invertebrates, and then you can, just like in classification, you have, kingdom, phylum, class, order, and so on. So vertebrates, we can go like different types of them as well, like chordates and such, and we'll learn about that. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about, though, we're almost done, is body symmetry. So this is how an organism is designed or set up, and they have patterns. Okay, this first one is radial symmetry. It's not that common. The second one is bilateral symmetry. This is body divided into 2 equal halves. That's what we are, humans. And then asymmetrical, no symmetry at all. Okay, so if you think of radial symmetry, you have like a central point on the organism, maybe like the mouth or something, and then all the things, arms or whatever, break off of it. And this may remind you of a sea star. Okay, and brittle stars, those kind of things. Jellyfish is another example of radial symmetry, but it's like a wheel and spokes on it. There can be more than 5, whatever, how many. But that's radial symmetry. The 2 main types are jellyfish and echinoderms, which are in the sea stars or in their sea cucumbers and other things. Okay. The one we're probably going to see the most is bilateral symmetry. That's where the body is divided into 2 equal halves. Now if I drew a person, do my best here. Okay. And we took this person and we drew a line right down through the middle. We would notice that they have 2 sides. And I'm going to do it as the person. This is right and left, and they have a right arm and a left arm. Even if we did their brain, they have a right side of their brain and a left side. And even lungs, they have a right lung and a left lung, a right kidney, a left kidney, and this just keeps repeating. A right leg, left leg, right? They have a right eye, a left eye. They have a right ear, a left ear. They just have all these repeating parts that you could just cut in 2. Okay, you could even go as far as saying some of the organs themselves have bilateral symmetry. Like if you were to look at the heart, you would say there's a right and a left half as well. So this is kind of an important one, and we'll start to see it. Once we get into the more complex invertebrates, at first we won't see it. We'll see asymmetry, then we'll see radial symmetry, and then finally we'll see bilateral symmetry. The last thing we want to talk about, though, is these kind of terms here. Cephalization is a big one, and that's the idea that the nervous system of an organism plays a major role. So if we were going to think about a dog, please excuse my drawing here. So if I had a dog, it's not a very good dog that I'm drawing here. Give him a tail. Okay. Whenever a dog moves through the environment, the thing that goes first is his head. Okay. And on the head are his eyes, his nose, and all those senses are in the front. So wherever he goes, everything's in front of him. That's called cephalization. So when an organism is interacting with the environment, the nervous system, those parts that tell it what's going on, are first. And that's not in every organism. You'll see that, and we'll be asking these questions as we go through. So remember cephalization. And then body cavities is another thing. So you think of yourself, and we could, when you get a chance, look at the body orientation. But and often what we do is we think of our own selves and think of, well, that's how everything is, but it's not. And so body cavities. So in a human, we have like organs. Okay, and then these organs are wrapped in tissue, like epithelial tissue, and like a covering, and then they're contained within a body cavity. Okay, and then you have another layer here. Okay, so, and you can even have, so if you think about a stomach, you have an inside of the stomach, the esophagus, the stomach, the intestine, you have a tube within this cavity. So this is an opening inside of another cavity, and we're going to look at that as well and understand that, because this kind of setup is determined very young. The sperm and egg comes together, and certain things have to happen as it splits, because you have an egg and a sperm, it forms one, then it goes into 2, into 4, just keeps splitting and splitting and splitting until it's a whole bunch of cells, and then there's certain things that tell this organism what to form. And it's kind of an amazing thing. But some organisms have body cavities, some have false ones. You look at them and you think, yeah, that's a body cavity, because it's an opening, but it's not. It's a false body cavity, and some have none of that at all. And we'll talk about that as we go. But that's kind of our notes. If you have any questions, let me know, and hope that helps you out.